and we're having the debate again on artificial intelligence. Is that going to help us, or is that going to replace our own intelligence?
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I am Jessica Aboud, and I am joined by the core four. I guess I'm part of the core four, but the core three are here. Tanya, Martin, and Paul. Everybody's back. It feels good.
It's good to be here.
Summer's a little squirrely with our schedules, but we're here. Yeah. Well, today we are discussing technology, how it fits and where it fits when it comes to educating our children. And we cannot possibly cover every corner of this conversation, but we are going to try to hit the highlights, see where it goes. And I think it's going to be lively based on our discussion before we started recording. So I'm excited. We're going to also tackle a listener question. But before we get there, how's our summer reading going?
I'm reading easy stuff. So my family had a weekend vacation, and so I grabbed the Sabatini book that Tanya bought at a homeschool convention recently to read, and a Graham Greene book, but I started with Sabatini book and didn't finish it. So I'm in the middle of The Snare.
Is it good?
Ooh.
It's great. It's great. And now this one took me longer to get into than most Sabatini books. Most of them, like 2 pages, I'm in.
Yeah.
This one took me, I don't know, a chapter before I was like, okay, like this is good.
Is that the one about Wellington?
Yes.
That's a
and
good
the Portuguese campaign.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
It's a good one.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything. But it's called The Snare, and there's multiple snares happening in the book.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of complexity going on that you can kind of see coming, but you don't know how it's going to end. So it keeps your attention.
Sounds fun.
It's a good summer read.
Read or audiobook?
Oh, either one would be fine. Yeah, I happen to have. I don't
Either one for
There's
Sabatini.
not Sabatini.
Oh, really?
I think the only audiobooks are like
The really
Captain
famous
Blood
one.
and
Yeah.
Oh, Scaramouche.
probably Scaramouche. Yeah,
Yeah.
those probably the only two on audio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to start recording audiobooks, Sabatini would be a great one to do.
Funny. Tanya?
I'm reading Moby Dick, so I'm going to say this for the next couple weeks at least. But I need to finish it by the conference. So
How far are you?
I'm all like 275 pages in out of 650.
Oh, it's only 650?
My version is only 650. I
Okay.
don't know.
You're making good progress then.
I am, because I'm listening on my commute, and then at night I go back through those pages to see anything, that I missed, because I'm not a good audible listener. And then I move forward in the morning during my morning reading. And so, but I do want to say, talking about books, is I literally was on this morning's commute, instead of Moby Dick, I was listening to the podcast that we did on the theme with John, on the theme of temperance. And I literally welled up. I've never cried in a podcast before. I've never cried listening to a podcast before. But I cannot talk about Lassie.
Oh.
So when we were talking about Lassie, all of a sudden in my car, John was just talking about Lassie, and I just started thinking about that scene where he has to tell him not to come, and he has to walk off and leave Lassie just sitting there. And I thought, oh, I'm crying during a podcast. I just need Lassie to leave my life, because I just can't do it.
In some ways, maybe Lassie makes you more human.
I don't know.
For all those
feel
people
like
that don't like animals, see this Lassie brings out the humanity in us.
maybe, but does that mean would I cry if the same thing had happened to a person? Sometimes I think we're even more sympathetic to animals. I think because of their inability to reason, so you can't explain things
Their
to
innocence.
them. Yes, than we are to people. I do worry about that, but I do cry but I haven't cried in Moby Dick yet. Am I going to?
At about page
I will
632.
Okay, I will just tears of relief if I get that far. I will say that the first 200 pages I thoroughly enjoyed. He is an absolutely great writer. But then we got into the fish, and it got a little bit more, drier. And then we got on the boat, and it was just...
And we know how you feel about boats.
Yes, and we're just, it just feels like it's meandering at the moment. We're just, looking for whales.
Well, that's what they're doing. They're meandering.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
A lot of meandering.
Yes.
Yeah, but you cried last week. I wonder
did.
if there's any other shows that people cry when that we do.
I don't know. But hopefully,
Depends on what kind of tears they are. How about you, Martin?
Well, I'm reading a bunch of things, but I did pick up at at a conference I was at last week, E.R. Dodd's book, The Greeks and the Irrational. And I read the first chapter of it. And I hadn't really thought about this before, but the Greeks did not have this conception of like predestination, free will, and these two separate things. They saw no problem at all in attributing actions to the gods and to people without any apparent discomfort about those being inconsistent. And I've been thinking about this issue a little bit because there's a short story I've been teaching recently where the predestination free will issue is sort of in there. And it just makes me realize that we in the West have made this into this conflict that is not necessarily there. We get into debates, theological debates about predestination free will all the time, but these are brought together in a story. A Sleeping Beauty is one of them. And the Oedipus story. The Greeks saw this differently, and I think we would do well to look at the way the Greeks view this, even to our theological benefit.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. What other summer reading you got going on?
I have some, books that are, we're going to announce the Parnassus Prize shortlist shortly. And so I've been, going over some of those books. That's all I'll say right now. But,
okay.
So I'm Plutarch. I went, I had set down my Plutarch because I had other things to do. And then I got up again and read yesterday the story of Themistocles and the naval battle with the Persians.
That's fun.
Oh my gosh. And Plutarch can be a little turgid sometimes, but I was just hooked on this story and what Themistocles does. Plutarch's a Greek, and he's relating these is a Roman, and he's relating these Greek stories. And the detail he goes into about the actions Themistocles took to outmaneuver, to outsmart the Persians was just amazing. It's a riveting story.
Cool. Well, how about we tackle a listener question? This is from Christy. She wrote our podcast inbox, and that, if you have a question, is podcast@memoriapress.com. So here's what Christy says. I've been faithfully listening to the podcast for about a year. From what I remember in one of the episodes, Tanya felt strongly that parents should be pre-reading literature for their kids and knowing what they're reading. I am reaching out to see how that practically plays out. I have 5 kids and can barely find the time to read leisurely. If I do have personal reading time, I will be reading their literature first before my own pleasure reading. The habit of waking up early to read for an hour is not practical this time in my life. I'm still having interrupted sleep. And a lot of us can relate to that. If you can't read the literature, can you rely on the literature teacher guides? Which I think is an excellent question. And she ends by saying, this has left me feeling overwhelmed and discouraged as I do desire to be a prepared homeschool mom. And Christy, we're with you. Sometimes it is overwhelming. Sometimes it is discouraging.
I am very sorry that I made her feel discouraged, because that is not at all my intent. And I will also say that when I started getting up at 5 in the morning and reading for that half hour before my kids got up, it was not until they were sleeping through the night.
Right.
I was not doing that with
because she says,
interrupted
I
sleep.
have 3 under 5. So she's probably
right.
getting sleep where she can find it.
Yes. And sometimes I was reading, the Iliad, trying to keep up, making a chart of, which gods were for the Greeks and which were for the Romans. But at other times I was reading British murder mysteries. So, it was I didn't do this perfectly. And as far as pre-reading the literature, that is ideal. That would be ideal. But if you can't get it done, then, her children are young, right?
Yes.
Well, she says 3 are under 5, so we don't know. 2 of them, though, they're probably pretty young. To use the teacher guides would be a very easy and good thing to do. But I would caution that, and again, I don't want to be discouraging, but the older kids through really all the way up, where at some point they need to be reading part of their reading aloud to someone. So at that point, you are listening to the story because your child is reading it. So you can keep up that way. I did not read everything my children read. I attempted it. But, you could just say it was really an epic fail. But I tried. I was constantly trying. And I think this is the plight of the homeschool mom, is you want to be a prepared homeschool mom. How do you do that when you've got a bunch of different levels going on and your kids are moving faster than you can move because they're not doing the laundry or cooking, or in my case, I was a minister's wife, they're not preparing 6,000 crafts for Bible school. Their only job is school. And so, and I had a horrible education and I wanted better for my children. So I chose this classical education thing that was very rigorous and time consuming. And I don't regret it. I didn't do it perfectly. But I was continually trying and maybe was reading. I could get the novels read pretty much. But even then, when they get to middle school, the novels are adult novels.
Right.
And it's hard to do it all. I think using the teacher guides is good, but I also think a good synopsis is good. Spark Notes or any of those things you can get online now would help if you can't actually read them. But I think from this email, my main concern would be to say, don't worry about it. Do the best you can, but don't worry about it and don't feel guilty because you're giving your child a better education than they could get anywhere else. And so you just have to rest in that and know that it's okay. And I was not, placing judgment on anybody, because when I look back at my years of homeschooling, I would love to try that again because I don't think I did a very good job.
And yet, I bet someone would have looked at your efforts and said, you are doing far better than you think you are. No?
Back in that time, no, they wouldn't, because back in that time, homeschooling wasn't accepted like it is now. They looked at me like I had 3 heads because not only was I homeschooling, but I was also doing Latin.
Yeah. But now, if you were homeschooling now and getting the same amount done,
yes,
people would be able to look at you and say, you're getting done what needs to be done. You're doing a great job.
And people could see the evidence of what my kids were doing and how it did stand out. It stood out in Sunday school class because they knew so much more than anybody else in our church, because they were getting this academic education, even though I failed many, many days.
And this is a low bar to establish, but if you're child reads one book, that's one more book than many kids have read in their entire school career.
It's true, because they don't get books anymore.
They don't read books anymore. And so you may think, that your kids haven't read enough or whatever, but they're reading a whole lot more than most kids are reading in school. And again, that is a low bar. We need to be careful making that our goal. But
Well, that's the thing is we talk through idealism, like this is the thing to do. This is the best way to do it. But we also, and we don't want to set a low bar, but we also need to say it's okay. Nobody's going to meet that ideal.
Mhm.
And so I guess we just need to be careful that people don't think we're actually living all this stuff we're talking about.
We do our best. We do our best.
Which is all anybody can do.
I have a weekly evaluation getting on this podcast and Jess asking me, what are you reading? Right. And that keeps me reading.
Right.
But one of the things is like, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, my wife and I decided we were getting off of social media as much as we could. We have the farm and we need to promote what we're selling on the farm and social media. But like we stopped consuming social media. And all of a sudden I could read a whole bunch more. Right. Because you don't realize what you're spending time on. And so, but finding what your accountability is and then saying, okay, this is reasonably what I can do. I would like to read a whole bunch more than I do.
I've got such a bookcase full of books I haven't read, and I think when I get to the nursing home.
I'll come visit you.
You'll be in the next room.
Oh.
And your son's going to be reading Twilight too. We already know that's going to happen.
That's
Remember
right.
that?
I'm not coming to visit you then.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I think that is helpful, that limitations are normal. Everybody has them. And her children are being served probably far more than she might give herself credit for.
At 100%. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
And this is, I bet, the attitude of almost every homeschool mom.
It's
every
a
homeschool
feeling
mom
of failure.
thinks that she's not doing enough. My wife said that, and our kids got a great education.
Right. But you do feel like you can't do it all because you can't do it all. You can't get it all done. But what you do get done is worth getting done.
Absolutely.
That's actually a great way to say it.
And as a youngest child in the family, I think my mom got her wheels under her by the time I was coming around, right? And so
you got run over.
Yeah, the oldest children. No.
Extending the metaphor.
No. Stop it, metaphor. The oldest children, I think, homeschooling parents feel like they're failing more, and then.
Well, then they see the evidence of what they've done. Right.
And then the youngest children benefit from the fact that their mom has done this for years, and it's just now she's got her rhythms, and she's,
That's right.
She may only be reading a quarter of the books, but after 4 kids, she's read all of them to help the 4th kid. Right.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, that is what happens is with that oldest one, you can't get it all done. But with the next one, you don't have to reread what you've read with the oldest one. So, it keeps getting better. Or you get just totally exhausted. And by the last one, you're like, okay, whatever. There's a bunch of books over there.
Try your own course. That's funny. Oh, well, let's dive into today's topic, technology. I think it's safe to say we are raising our children in a tech-saturated world. And I think it's also safe to say that technology does shape us. So when it comes to educating our children, when should we use technology? When should we avoid it? And how is it shaping the way kids learn? Paul, I want to start with you. When we say technology, are we talking about everything from calculators to Chromebooks?
Yeah, I mean, it's very broad.
Right.
10, 15 years ago, when you talked about technology in the classroom, you were talking about whether you had a projector that could put a slideshow on the board.
That's right.
Or whether you just had some sort of overhead projector that you could put a transparency on, or whether you had just a plain old chalkboard, right? And in some ways, probably the leap from chalkboard to dry erase board was a leap in technology.
And then smart boards.
Right. And then you have smart boards and all that kind of stuff. And, in that era, it was interesting because you started to see where schools would put in projectors that were capable of like showing a movie that all of a sudden teachers were, because maybe the educational goal was we want them to be able to do slideshows because we want them to be able to put information on the board quickly. But then what teachers would do, and I mean, I sat in some of these classrooms as a student, was, well, we're just going to watch this movie. And you put the movie up, and the students are just thrilled because there's no active learning. There's no homework that's going to come after that. And the teacher's thrilled because they don't have to do any work, right? And then we got even further from that, where it's not a common thing we're seeing on the screen to it's an individual one. So I think the train just keeps picking up speed of what, when we talk about technology, because, and this is the pro technology people make the argument, well, a pencil is a piece of technology that Plato railed against, writing stuff down. Yes, there are technologies. The question is whether that technology greatly inhibits the goal of what we are doing, right? So if the goal of education is actually for the student not to know how to acquire knowledge, but to actually acquire knowledge, not to be able to manipulate tools in order to find the knowledge they want, but actually be able to do rational deduction in their mind as a skill, then those are things we have to ask them to do without supports, right? Without helps. And I think that's the big crux of the technology question is this technology coming in? Like if you give a calculator to a fourth grader or a third grader, they're never going to learn their math facts. But if you give it to a ninth grader that you're asking them to do sine and cosine of things, but they know their math facts, well, then that calculator becomes an appropriate tool. Mm-hmm. But if you're giving a student, a high schooler who ought to be coming up with their own ideas for an essay, a tool that provides those ideas for them, then they're not going to be honing that skill of coming up with their own ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that the calculator at the appropriate time is actually a great first example. You're right. It does kind of cut off the skill building, but there may be an appropriate time for any given thing. Yeah. I think that's helpful.
When I majored in accounting after English.
I'm so sorry.
I know.
That, yeah.
Well, I didn't ever really like it much, but I did tax returns. I had this little tax business when my kids were growing up, and I could work at home. And when I started working in the tax business, to do a tax return, it was all on paper. And you literally there was some way you could add everything up on both sides and it would equal 0. And then you knew that it was right. But then software came along and it could do all of that for you. And you no longer had to do any of that. But I knew because I'd worked in actual ledgers and I'd done the actual work. And there were no computers in my college classrooms for sure. And so when the software failed, I knew that. Mm-hmm. But the young people who worked for me did not. They knew how to plug things into a program, but they did not know accounting. Mm-hmm. And so they were at a huge deficit because they couldn't tell if something was wrong or not, because the system said it was right, but they've put something in the wrong place or done something wrong with it. And there was no way for them to know because they didn't have any knowledge. I mean, we're turning into, we'll be like little unthinking robots.
Right.
Like, what's that movie? WALL-E?
Oh, I've never seen it.
It'll be like that. It's a scary movie.
Yeah.
So where here at our schools, whether it's HLS here where we are locally or the schools that we counsel across the country, where do we put technology? Where do we avoid it? Because most modern classrooms, kids have screens everywhere.
Right.
We're not necessarily like that, but what do we do?
Listen, the three of us have been in many classrooms with screens that were a total waste of time. By the time the teacher gets all of the Chromebooks working, the class period's over. It's crazy. Yeah. It just makes no sense to me to have those screens in the classroom. One of Cheryl's big thing, maybe the biggest thing for her was time on task. And a computer in the classroom is not time on task. So, well, we just don't have them now. Now we do have a computer lab now because the SAT is gone totally online. So we had to have enough computers that our students could take the SAT online. But other than that, we don't have, our kids just don't. We send them a link to a typing program after 6th grade, I think, so that they can learn to type. So that they can type papers, but now with
But that's
AI,
also not done in the home. That's not done in the classroom. That's done
They
in the
do-
home.
the
So-
papers, right?
Well, and even the learning to type, like that's a summer project.
It's a summer project.
Okay.
But this coming year, we are, because of the problem with AI that we've seen, we are going back to those little blue books like you used in
a blue book
college.
test
And the
book.
students from 7th grade through 12th are going to handwrite their papers.
It's the only way to
because-
solve this problem.
That's right. And they're going to have to do it in the classroom. So they can edit at home after the teacher. They'll do it because, it's like, where do you find the time to do this in the classroom?
I was going to say,
But we're going to have to.
Okay.
So I think the idea is that we do like a paragraph at a time. So you don't take your whole literature hour to do it or your whole history hour, but you work on a paragraph. The teacher quickly edits it. Then you can do your own editing at home based on, but the teacher has that work that you have done without the benefit of a computer. We are not allowed to have cell phones in the classroom. They have to be, if they're drivers, they obviously need their cell phone. So they're supposed to leave it in their car or locked up in their backpack and never refer to it through the day.
So I had a student a couple years ago who normally was very active in the class, and one day was not being active in the class, and I could see him fiddling with something, and I went over to him and I kept teaching, and and I went over and I realized it wasn't that he was looking at his phone, but he was playing with the rubber casing on the edge of his phone in his pocket. And I was like, give that to me. He's like, I wasn't looking at it. I said, doesn't matter. It was a distraction. And that's the big thing, is that these things become distractions. And I mean, there's research out there of the dopamine hits of the notifications they give you and that sort of thing. So even just to have it in your pocket and feel the vibration makes you feel this thing that other people are thinking about me, or I've got something to look at or whatever. And that's what the kids are trying to feed off of, which creates a distraction of what they actually need to be learning in that moment.
Which is why we don't allow smartphones or smartwatches as well.
Oh, sure.
Because they're getting those notifications.
Yeah.
So no smartwatches.
Yeah.
I do wonder, though, if someone could counter what we just said and say, yes, but if you're going to say that there are certain technologies that resource students, to not use those would be to put them at a disadvantage such that they're already behind their peers who are out in, different contexts, but they're going to be competing for the same jobs. They're going to be competing for college entrance.
Behind in their ability to use all this technology or behind in what they have up here. I mean, that's the point. I mean, you have, artificial intelligence. The question goes back to Plato. Okay, so Plato tells this story about the inventor of writing. And he comes to the king and he says, "Oh, king, I have invented this great thing. It's called writing, and it will increase wisdom and among the people." And the king looks back at him and he says, "Actually, it will do the opposite. It will replace intelligence, because you're going to put it out here now instead of in here." And this is writing, right? Which is this is education technology, a very primitive form of it, but it's education technology. And so what happened? Well, in a way, he was right, because memorization suffered. You no longer had to keep it in here, so you didn't put it in here. You put it out here, and that became that diminished the ability to memorize. So if it happens even with this kind of technology, imagine that ramped up in more complex forms of technology, and that's what really Tanya was talking about. Will it replace you in certain ways? And my favorite anecdote, have I told it on the show before? On Gilligan's Island,
That I didn't.
You did see that one
Okay.
coming.
Wasn't on my bingo board.
There was this episode, and Gilligan saves the life of this slave girl. And so she is so thankful to him that she starts trying to do things for him. She just becomes his servant. And so he walks out one day, and the professor had made this exercise bicycle for Gilligan. And so Gilligan would get out there every morning, and he'd go on his exercise bicycle. And so one morning, Gilligan goes out there, and she's on his exercise bicycle. And he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I am exercising for you." Well, that doesn't help you. It replaces you, but it doesn't help you do what the technology was really designed to do. So I think this goes on all across technology, and we're having the debate again on artificial intelligence. Is that going to help us, or is that going to replace our own intelligence? That's the question. And so I went online the other day, and I asked AI. I said, if artificial intelligence is possible, is artificial wisdom possible? And it responded saying, well, yes, it is, but efforts are being done to try to do this. Apparently somebody's trying to do that, artificial wisdom. I don't know what that's going to consist of. But then it said, but of course, the limitation is that computers aren't conscious. Don't have consciousness. I said, "Oh, you think?" So
At least it recognizes that.
At least it did, yeah. I don't know. So I think this AI thing. I mean, I can just attest to my own grandchildren, because my children have not let them. They don't do screens. Now, my oldest son is a software developer, so he's with my oldest grandson, he will do some things that are very intentional in terms of teaching him certain things. But they keep them away from screens. And they are the most bookish children I've ever seen. They love books. You sit down and one of them jumps in your lap with a book and wants you to read to them. They love books. And I think, my theory is that the absence of technology is one of the main reasons why they're like that.
Oh, yeah, because if they had a video game going all the time, that would be the choice.
Well, and I went to a boarding school for high school. We had a computer lab that I think we're in 45 minutes a week for some typing. And and in that same sort of culture as smartphones were coming out, all the stuff, we didn't have any of that. And the sheer amount of my classmates that are in coding fields and technology fields is mind-boggling, right? Because you think about what do you want a coder to be able to do? You don't want their skill to be engaging on the front end of the consumer end of the technology. You want their skill to be able to reason through how that ought to work, right? And so people have very little difficulty picking up the consumer end of anything. And your question was, will our students be further behind in the use of the tools? And I think the response there is it doesn't matter on the consumer end of the tool. Mm. What it matters is their ability to create the tool, right? Are we forming children? Are we educating children to have the skills, not to be able to use the technology that has been created for ease of use, but being able to create the technology, right? That's what we want in our country. Like in our country, we want to be at the forefront of scientific, development and technological development. Well, then you need the people that can think about it.
Right, because, our schools are always about a generation behind, right? And so the jobs they're preparing children for are not the ones that are going to be there when they graduate. And this thing with artificial intelligence and coding, artificial intelligence will be doing the coding. Okay.
Oh, it already does.
Those low-level coders are going. That's what we think we're educating them for right now. That's not going to work out too well. It's only going to be the people who have a developed intelligence and have wisdom in terms of how to do things who are going to be needed because somebody's going to need to control the controllers. And it's not going to be the people who trained in low-level coding, which has now been taken over by machines.
And we did, before we started recording, we were talking about MIT last week or 2 weeks ago at the point when we're recording, just published a study on the effects of AI and student performance.
And on brain development.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And performance. I think they use standardized tests as one of the markers.
Yeah. I'm not sure how they. It also seemed to me that they were also measuring probably brain function through whatever you call that with the doctors. You put the
like a neurological.
Yeah, something to see what neurons are firing. That was the impression I got. I don't know that for sure, but it was interesting because they had a group that had to do it all by themselves with no tools. One that could use search engines, your typical search engine, and one that could use AI. And
how long a period was it?
It's like 12 weeks or something.
I don't remember.
Okay. So it was
recent,
very recent. Because I'm thinking, how can you have research on AI yet?
No, yeah, but
they could tell in a short period
of time that if you're asking the AI to do X, Y, or Z, then they were saying that those children had the lowest level of sort of brain engagement, which I thought was fascinating. Which is, I mean, it makes sense. That's the point, right?
Because you don't have to engage.
You're outsourcing it, right? Yes. You're outsourcing it.
And so we get lazy brain.
Well, and even I also read a recent study where, and this wouldn't take a lot of like longitudinal, I guess, time to show in a study that if you use AI to write something for you, whether it's a paper or an email for work, you actually spend more time on the project because you, as the human brain, have to get in there and edit it.
Right.
So it would take you less time to just do it yourself than it would to do something you think is helping you or saving you time or generating ideas. It takes longer because you spend more time on the back end of the task.
Right. That makes sense. And I, I mean, can I talk about the app?
Sure.
So we release our app.
Well,
so we release the app. So we've got all these tools on there now to help students review. And this was a disagreement between us. So they wanted everything on the app, and I just refused to put those phonics flashcards on the app because I just didn't want a 5-year-old with a phone held in front of them, with their flashcards. And it's not that it's not a great tool, but you do have to be really careful with it and use it just as a supplement you can't just hand your child a computer or a phone and say, here, learn this Latin vocabulary on this app. Doing that versus putting those words on the board and actually talking about them and talking about derivatives and seeing if the student can come up with words that look like aqua and making the connection between all of those English words that have something to do with water and aqua. That is brain changing. That is work. But to just go through flashcards on an app, that should be after that learning process has taken place.
Yes. And I think our disagreement was how we expected the average person would use them. And
can we trust people just to understand that the phonics flashcards, that really a 5-year-old just doesn't need a phone.
Right. But what apps on what flashcards on an app allow you to do is the sort of sorting that when you'd go through flashcards and you have to go, I don't know that one, I do know that one, then I need to have piles, like all of that mundane stuff of afterwards to make sure you keep that cataloged and all that sort of stuff. Like that's what that technology should be stepping in to do.
Well, and it's great because while another child is working with a parent, the one child can be on the app reviewing their vocabulary. We're not doing that in the classroom at all. They're still using actual flashcards, and you couldn't control that in a classroom. But at home, I can see that it's a great tool, but it is not a replacement. It will never be a replacement. And maybe eventually if people want it, we'll put the phonics flashcards up. But that was the one thing
that was the hill Tanya was dying on.
It was.
Well, so much of it is designed to replace something that shouldn't be replaced. I think that a lot of people think of learning as a means to some other thing, a job or whatever. But if learning is an end in itself, why would you want to outsource it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that the whole point of education is to learn.
It's to develop this right here. It's not to develop things out here. I mean, that's a byproduct, but real learning, and I think the kind of learning that we do, is to make you wiser. And you, again, you can't outsource wisdom. I could quote AI on that.
And to go back to that, right? Like, what can you outsource? And I think that the same critique could be leveraged against learning vocab on a flashcard app or on the Memoria Press app with our flashcards, in the sense of like, well, then you're assuming that language is merely, or rather that we learn merely by looking at something rather than the tactile nature of having flashcards. And, I know that one's got a torn corner and that one, like,
I remember that.
All that kind of stuff is also because we do learn through our other senses, right? And in some ways, by providing the convenience of wherever you are, you could whip out your phone and say, practice your Latin vocab. We are sacrificing other ways that we as humans sense knowledge and acquire it.
Like short circuiting. You know how I'm sure we've talked about this 100 times on the podcast, that you remember more when you write by hand than if you type.
Yes.
So you're circuiting, even like the flashcard experience.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I didn't believe that in college. I went and bought myself a thing to type out my notes. And I realized this was my last year in college, and I realized that all of a sudden I was doing poorly in tests and quizzes. And I realized that I had to study very, very little up until that point. And the moment I started typing it as opposed to writing by hand was the moment that I was no longer processing the information in class. I was able to type quickly enough that I didn't have to process the information.
You didn't have to think about it.
Didn't have to think about it, so it didn't stick. So then when it was time for the quiz or the assessment, I didn't have anything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I may have mentioned this before, but Amor Toll's way of writing, have I talked about this? Okay, well, he was on a podcast, and the host asked him, how do you compose? How do you write your stories? Talking about Gentlemen in Moscow and the Lincoln Highway. And he said, I write it out longhand on one day. And then the next day, I type it in. And as I do that, I edit it. And I thought, that is a great way to do that. And I don't remember if they discussed this or not, but writing things out longhand takes longer. And that's a good thing because there's more thought that goes into each word that way.
And I think you could argue maybe it actually doesn't take longer if you think more deeply in the beginning stage.
Well, yeah, in the end, in terms of editing and all that, yeah. But it allows you more time to think as you're going along. Sure. Whereas I can type really fast, so I'm not thinking. Yeah, probably as well as I am if I'm actually writing it out longhand. So I resolved after that I would any new things that I wrote, I would write out longhand and then type it in editing. And of course, I never did. No.
You should do it for your conference.
I thought I've been thinking about it again recently. I'm thinking, okay,
do it for your conference speech and let's see if it's better.
Is that even possible?
That's the method I used to use when I would write for the classical teacher. When I was writing articles, I would handwrite them, and sometimes because of time, I'd get 3/4 of the way done, and then be like, "Well, I'm going to start typing this, and then I'll finish the last quarter." Yeah, and the last quarter is always worse.
Really?
Well, I do want to go back, Tanya, to what you're talking about with the fact that we have an app. We have streaming courses. We are talking on a podcast. We have, which people need phones and internet to access.
That's right.
We have an online school.
Yes.
So I want to make sure that we're forthright in that we absolutely do have products that use technology that we recommend to people every single day.
That's right.
So we're not kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth. We're doing our best to say there are some resources that in certain contexts can prove very helpful to get content to people that it wouldn't otherwise be available to, or, whatever it is.
And we do the best we can.
Right.
Like with the online academy, that is a live teacher.
That's right.
In having conversation with students.
Mm-hmm.
It is as close to a classroom as we can get, even
Right.
though your child is looking at a screen.
Well, and even, I mean, like when I was running the online academy, I would actively advise people, if you have a local cottage school that has a great teacher teaching this, go to the local cottage school because they'll be physically there. They will
Right.
learn better. If, a school comes to us and says, hey, I can't find a Latin teacher. Can we, sign up our kids to take Latin with you all? Yes, but this is a Band-Aid. This is not the fix.
That's right.
Like, this is just to get you through till you can find a teacher. Because the online academy, my word was we were reluctantly online. Is we would much rather be physically in your
Right.
living room.
Oh, any teacher, I think, would prefer to be in a classroom with children rather than on a screen. But I do think we've done the best we could with it. And
Right.
I think that we are not anti-technology.
Right.
We are anti-technology being a distraction from learning content.
Or undermining.
Undermining the skills that they
overall,
will
right.
require.
Well, or as Neil Postman puts it in the best book on this subject, by the way, is called Technopoly. It is a brilliant analysis. And he's writing, this is 20, 30 years ago, he's writing this, but he sees it coming and it's already happening then. When the problem is when the tool is no longer the tool, it becomes the tyrant.
Ooh.
There we go. Nailed it.
Case closed. Martin.
Well, but I mean, and to be fair, right? Like, this is the way our society approaches technology now, is that it is the tyrant. It's not, like, okay, more mundane example, but in choosing business software, the question isn't how do we make this software fit the business? The question is, how do we make the business fit the software?
Exactly.
And maybe
And I mean, that's the way we approach it as
Sure.
a society, and it probably should be the opposite, right?
Yeah. And not to kick a hornet's nest, but I do wonder if we aren't thoughtful in the ways that we integrate technology into our own souls, into our own homes. It becomes our tyrant and we don't even know it.
Yes.
And that's what's scary, is the responsibility we have in our own person, in our homes, in our, our classrooms, that we always remember that it serves us and that it can really easily slip into a place where it's,
Where we are serving it.
That's right.
And that's a good point too, that we've got to set an example for our children.
Right.
Our teachers are also not allowed to have their phones out in the classroom, except sometimes they have to play classical music or whatever. I mean, every now and then they have to, but the rule is no visible phones, and that includes the teachers. So you do have to work on that at home as well,
right.
To put the technology down.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a good note to end on, that our posture towards it starts with us.
Right.
Well, and it can be done in a way, and I've seen families do this, where the kids do have access to play video games, to do certain things, but it is put in its proper place.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
And, I was just on this weekend vacation with my family on houseboats, and some of my nieces and nephews, they pretty much have, not unfettered, but I mean, they have a lot of tech in their hands normally, but it's a weekend with the family. None of that showed up, and there was no complaint about it because they had been trained that this is the place it ought to,
Right.
reside.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't want people to hear us like, you have to be Luddites, you have to go Amish.
Right.
Like, I mean, as
Although
much
we
as
do love the Amish.
one of my favorite books is Better Off, which is about an MIT guy who goes to live with the Amish for a year and what he
remember
learned.
that. When you read that,
It's
yeah.
fascinating.
I've never heard of that.
Oh yeah, Lee recommended it to me. It's really good.
I'm going to read that.
But,
what, if I ever finish Moby Dick?
But so you can use it. It's just think about what its use is for. Right. And your point about what is it doing to your soul? That's
Oh,
important.
my kids played video games. My kids still play video games. we didn't get rid of them. We just put them, they
In
just
their
had
place.
their spot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard. I remember as a kid, I played, like, I had a few video games, and I viscerally remember my mother yelling at me from the kitchen, like, Paul, go take out the trash, right? And but like,
you were in the middle of a game.
I was in the middle of a game, but trying to teach me, like, there are more important things that you have to learn to turn that thing off when it's appropriate to go engage with the human that wants to engage with you, right? If
Have you ever played Mario Kart?
No, and I have a place for video games.
Yes?
It was a metal receptacle. With
I
a lid
knew you were
outside.
going to say that, Martin. I knew it.
Speaking of Luddites,
The Cawthorns. Yeah. Oh, well, this is a good discussion. I think we could keep going, but we're going to
not.
end this one right here. Oh, well, thanks, guys. And thank you for joining us. We will be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.